Some memorable events at the Hatch Shell. Over the years, the Hatch Shell has been host to a wide range of events, many of which returned year after year. This slide shows what I'm sure is not an all-inclusive list of events that took place at the Hatch Shell beginning in the 70s. Most of these no longer occur as the costs of production and security have increased greatly over time. The 5 items in the rightmost column all still occur every year at the Hatch Shell. The Boston Pops July 3rd and July 4th concerts. Also, the Boston Landmarks Orchestra has a weekly concert series in the summer. About a dozen charity walks either use the Esplanade as part of their route or begin or conclude at the Hatch Shell itself. Groundbeat's a relatively new series started by the Esplanade Association in 2018 to bring more diverse music and artists to the Hatch Shell stage. And Friday Flicks has brought family-friendly movies to the Hatch Shell for 34 years. Next, I'd like to tell you a little more about the Pops concert and a few one-time events that you may not know anything about. The Hatch Shell is best known for the free outdoor concerts held here for over 80 years, especially the Boston Pops concerts. Contrary to what many think, the Boston Pops existed long before Arthur Fiedler became involved. The orchestra, eventually known as the Pops, was founded in 1885, 4 years after the Boston Symphony Orchestra, as a second identity for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The second orchestra consisted primarily of musicians from the BSO, although generally not the first-chair players, and originally performed a spring series held when the BSO was on break. The orchestra combined light classical music, tunes from current hits of the musical theater, and an occasional novelty number. The promenade concerts, as they were originally called, were soon informally known as popular concerts, which eventually became shortened to Pops, the name officially adopted in 1900. There were actually 17 conductors before Arthur Fiedler. Fiedler first led the Pops in Symphony Hall as a replacement conductor during the 1926 season, following the resignation of another conductor, but, despite his desire, was not named the permanent conductor. Finally, in 1930, after the next conductor's contract was not renewed, Arthur Fiedler was offered a 3-year contract and thus began a 50-year tenure as the Pops conductor. Under Fiedler's direction, the Boston Pops Orchestra reportedly made more recordings than any other orchestra in the world, most of them for RCA Victor, with total sales of albums, singles, tapes, and cassettes exceeding $50 million. They also recorded the first orchestral recording, Jalouse, to sell more than 1 million copies. Boston Pops radio broadcasts were nationally syndicated each week from 1962 to 1992, and the national public television program Evening at Pops ran from 1970 to 2005. By the time John Williams was appointed conductor of the Pops in January 1980, he was best known as a composer for film. Williams both broadened and updated the Boston Pops repertoire, writing and commissioning many new compositions, while also introducing arrangements of recent pieces of popular music that would be suitable for orchestral performance. Williams stepped down as conductor at Boston Pops at the end of 1993, at which time he assumed the title of laureate conductor. The appointment of the 20th conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra, and only the 3rd conductor since Arthur Fiedler became conductor in 1930, fell to Keith Lockhart. Born in 1959, he was 35 years old when the choice was made, the same age Arthur Fiedler had been at the time of his appointment. Over time, the number of Pops concerts on the Esplanade diminished. The original concerts started out as 20 to 24 performances over a 4-week period in July and August. And the concerts were extremely popular for many years. During World War II, for example, the only concerts that continued to be held in area parks were the Esplanade concerts. But by the 70s, attendance was dwindling. In 1974, David Mugar partnered with Fiedler to reinvigorate the concerts. His thought was to start with the Independence Day celebrations, and so the 1812 Overture, fireworks, and cannon were added to the July 4th concert. By 1976, with 400,000 at the July 4th concert, the Pops set a world record for attendance at a classical music concert. However, attendance dwindled after Fiedler's death in 1979. The July 4th concerts remained extremely popular, but not the general concert series. Over time, the Pops concerts were reduced to 2 weeks, in 2003, just to an annual Fiedler Memorial Concert along with the July 3rd and 4th concerts. Finally, in 2004, the BSO announced that they were discontinuing the Pops series and would only hold the July 4th concerts, the rehearsal on July 3rd and the big event on July 4th. The BSO cited high costs, $100,000 per concert, $70,000 for musicians and $30,000 for sound, light, and security, and a lack of corporate sponsors. The BSO was also increasing their emphasis on their summer programs at Tanglewood at that point. Today, the Boston Landmarks Orchestra fills the musical gap left by the elimination of the Pop series on the Esplanade. Founded in 2001 by conductor and community advocate Charles Ansbacher, the orchestra is active throughout the neighborhoods of Boston, mainly in the summertime. In 2007, the orchestra established a weekly concert series at the Hatch Memorial Shell. The Hat Shell also has a long history as a place of community gatherings, important civic moments, and performances of all kinds. In 1945, the dashing and profane General George Patton addressed a large crowd at the Hat Shell. A newspaper clipping at the top of the slide shows the front page story from the Globe reporting on his visit, along with the parade route ending at the Hat Shell and a moment from Patton's speech from the stage of the Hat Shell. Patton was considered an adopted son of the area, having married Beatrice Eyre, a native Bostonian. She actually grew up in the Eyre mansion that's now a museum on Calm Ave in the Back Bay. The Pattons bought a large horse farm they named Green Meadows in Hamilton in 1928, and that became their real home. Mrs. Patton had not seen her husband since he left for the war over 2 years before from Fort Benning, Georgia. When Patton arrived, he first kissed his wife and then proceeded to enjoy a true hero's welcome. Accompanied by 25 state troopers on motorcycles, he was greeted by 2 100-foot aerial ladders that were opened to create an archway for the general to pass through in Cambridge, and screaming crowds that delayed the motorcade along the whole 25-mile route. At the Hat Shell, the general addressed a crowd of 20,000, including 300 men from area war hospitals who had served in his 3rd Army units. As local dignitaries praised the general, he solemnly saluted the wounded veterans before him with, "Here are your heroes." Later that night, he attended a dinner for 1,000 at the Copley Plaza Hotel and then went on to California the next day, intending to return to Hamilton for his summer vacation. This U.S. trip turned out to be his last time in the United States. In December 1945, while still in Germany, Patton's chief of staff invited him on a pheasant hunting trip. His car collided with an American Army truck at low speed. Others in the car were only slightly injured, but Patton hit his head on the glass partition in the back seat, began bleeding from a gash in the head, complained he was paralyzed and having trouble breathing. He was taken to a hospital in Heidelberg, where Patton was discovered to have a compression fracture, resulting in a broken neck and cervical spinal cord injury that rendered him paralyzed from the neck down. After 12 days, he died in his sleep of pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure on December 21st. Patton was buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery alongside some wartime casualties of the 3rd Army in accordance with his request to be buried with his men. In 1954, Massachusetts commissioned a statue of the general. The statue, located at the Hat Shell Oval, is just to the right of the Hat Shell. It's a recast of a statue of Patton that is at West Point. The statue is the work of James Earl Fraser, who was a pupil of Augustus St. Gaudens. Fraser is probably best known as the designer of the Buffalo nickel. On the lower right, you see a picture of President Eisenhower viewing the statue during a November 1954 visit to Boston. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years, South African leader Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Mandela had disappeared from view in 1964 after giving a 4-hour speech at the conclusion of a sabotage trial, where he was convicted and received a life sentence. He'd become famous during the anti-apartheid era for his activism and his leadership in the outlawed African National Congress. In June of 1990, Mandela embarked on a U.S. tour, part of a larger 13-nation tour to raise awareness of the anti-apartheid struggle and to raise money for the African National Congress. In 12 days, he visited 8 U.S. cities, including Boston, a city known at that time both for its progressive causes and its racial divisions. He spoke at Madison Park High School, lunched at the Kennedy Library, and culminated his public day with a speech at the Hat Shell. Mandela had become more controversial in the days before his visits to Boston by endorsing the Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat, Cuba's Fidel Castro, and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, and for refusing to disavow previous support for violent resistance by South African blacks and the wholesale nationalization of South African industry. Protests at the visits were minimal, but security measures like keeping his motorcade route secret were instituted. At Madison Park High School in Roxbury, a late flight and a previous engagement delayed Mandela for hours. It was 87 degrees outside that day, and temperatures soared inside the school. Yet the crowd of 1,500 to 2,000 packed into the stuffy gymnasium soldiered through. When he finally arrived, he spoke for less than 10 minutes, but the theme of Mandela's message was clear: the importance of education. He urged youths to stay in school, saying that a good education is necessary to help in the struggle. A private lunch with the Kennedy family members at the Kennedy Library was an acknowledgement of the strong connection Mandela felt to the Kennedy family. Robert Kennedy had visited South Africa in 1966 and given a memorable speech at the University of Cape Town. His Ripple of Hope speech, delivered at Cape Town, is widely considered the greatest speech of his career. Kennedy also met with ANC leaders and visited the black township of Soweto. Later, Ted Kennedy had attempted to visit Mandela when he was in prison on Robben Island. The event at the Hat Shell was joyful. The crowd and Mandela celebrated. All the photos on the slide are from the Hat Shell event. The crowd was estimated at 250,000. People filled the oval lawn, hung from trees, and sat in canoes on the Charles River to be a part of the event. There were no arrests that day in the large crowd. A concert preceded Mandela's speech. Musical guests included a wide range of people: Stevie Wonder, Livingston Taylor, Bobby McFerrin, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, Paul Simon, South Africa's Johnny Clegg Savuka, Michelle Schacht, and a local rap group, Young Nation. The event started at noon, with Mandela scheduled to speak at 4 p.m. He spoke at 6 p.m. Mandela praised New England's leadership in the anti-apartheid movement and identified his own cause with the American Revolution. "It was you that supported us when very few knew of our existence, our trials, our tribulations," he said from the Hatchell stage. "It was you who rallied around our cause when we soldiered on by ourselves. Thus you become the conscience of American society." Mandela specifically praised the pioneering and leading role of Massachusetts, which, with legislative action in 1977, was the first state that adopted comprehensive sanctions against South Africa. Also, the city of Boston was one of the first cities in the United States to divest of investments in companies doing business with the apartheid-supporting government of South Africa. Mandela also had a personal reason to visit the area. 2 of his daughters and 6 of his grandchildren lived in Massachusetts. That evening, fundraising took center stage as Mandela attended a $5,000 per couple dinner for 1,000 people. The Hatchell has also held many rock concerts. Not all of them ran smoothly. In 1994, WFNX, as part of their summer concert series, booked a very popular punk rock band, Green Day, for a free Welcome Back weekend in September. Green Day's third album, Dookie, had been released in February and was a worldwide success, reaching number 2 in the United States and the top 5 in several other countries. It's credited with bringing punk rock to mainstream popularity and with propelling Green Day to worldwide fame. The band was known for being energetic and frenetic in its performances. The Boston concert promoters were looking to bring live rock back to the Esplanade in a big way, and a free weekend concert welcoming back college students with Green Day as the attraction seemed like a great way to do it. Knowing the band's antics and the recent propensity for moshing by concertgoers, the promoters met with state officials and noted that they would need a lot of dudes and security tees, because when they start moshing, we'll need it. There were also state and local police to provide protection for the band, the anticipated 30,000 to 35,000 concertgoers, and the public property. Concert was set to start at 7 p.m. By 2 p.m., the Hatchell Oval lawn was already filling up, and to the surprise of organizers, the crowd was already moshing. By the time the band started, the crowd was estimated at over 70,000. As one concert organizer recalls the scene, when Green Day hit the stage, the dynamite just goes off. The music's loud, the crowd is pushing forward, and the band is intense. Things are getting out of control. At one point, the lead singer jumped into the flower garden in front of the stage and began ripping up and throwing the plants. Park staff had to drag him out, as shown in the photo on the slide. Fans were moshing and rushing past the crowd barriers to get to the stage. Before long, unruly fans were slinging glass Snapple bottles through the air toward the stage. What organizers thought was a great sponsorship get led to hundreds of bottles crashing and breaking on the Hatchell and on the stage. The band suddenly left the stage after playing just 7 songs for a total of 28 minutes. The crowd got more unruly, and the security and police got tougher. Promoters could barely be heard pleading, "This is Boston, this is our Esplanade, take care of it. The police and staff are your neighbors." In the end, the police pushed the crowd out of the park. Starr Drive, Mass Ave, and the Longfellow Bridge were all closed, and small groups of fans wandered the neighborhood, many getting into more trouble. Final toll was more than 100 injured and 50 arrested. The story was picked up by news stations around the country, including LA, New York, and CNN. As one local TV reporter noted, this was not exactly an Arthur Fiedler night at the Hatchell. Dispatch came together while its 3 members were at Middlebury College. They moved to Boston after college and toured extensively. Their music featured elements of rock, funk, and reggae, and they maintained a relatively low profile after their inception in 1995, never signing with a label or a major publicity company. Dispatch gained much recognition outside of New England without any help from a label, thanks to peer-to-peer file sharing of the time, such as Napster, as well as word of mouth. During their rise to indie fame, they put out 4 studio albums, but it wasn't until the band's so-called final concert, held in Boston in July of 2004, that the full magnitude of their following became apparent. In 2004, the members announced a hiatus and scheduled a farewell concert to their fans in order to get closure on the Dispatch portion of their lives. The free show was performed at the Hatchell and was called The Last Dispatch. Fans flocked from all over, from Italy, Portugal, South Africa, Spain, Mexico, New Zealand, and Australia, among others, making up an estimated total audience of 110,000. The original prediction of the turnout was between 10,000 and 30,000, and the huge crowd surprised even the indie band. The large crowd spilled out onto Starr Drive, which had to be closed, as the temperature hit 90 degrees for the Saturday afternoon concert. The band swam in the Charles River to stay cool and climbed 30-foot trees for a better view. There were some incidents of bottle throwing, but this time the issues were more medical than criminal. 50 were taken in and treated for heat stroke, dehydration, alcohol, and drug overdoses, and 18 were taken to hospital for cuts, mostly from thrown bottles. There was only one arrest. Dispatch then released a documentary film, The Last Dispatch, which chronicles their final 12 days together as a band, including the Hatshell concert, and tells the story of how they became the band that redefined independent music history. The band eventually reunited in 2011 and remains active today.